Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Trump's senior trade advisor says the president wants 90 deals in 90 days following his pause on tariffs. China has announced it's raising additional levies on US goods to 125%. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff is in Russia holding talks with Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, countries across Europe pledged $24 million in military aid to Ukraine. Our top story. China's announced it's raising additional tariffs on US goods to 125%. The Chinese ministry says they will come into effect from tomorrow. It comes after President Donald Trump announced a 90-day pause on additional levies for most countries, but raised China's to 145%. For more on this, I'm joined from Singapore by correspondent Patrick. Patrick, thank you for joining me. So China hitting back with tariffs of 125% on American goods. What can you tell us about the latest countermeasures?
Well, we're waiting for much of the day to hear about what sort of countermeasures China might take. It was an ominous wait, you might say, several hours after the Trump administration clarified that it was jacking up tariffs on Chinese exports to 145% versus the 125% we previously thought they were going to be. But, you know, the timing of the announcement eventually was interesting. It happened around the time that trade was closing for most markets in Asia, notably Shanghai and Hong Kong rose, reversing earlier losses during the day. Investors were picking up stocks, betting on the Chinese government unleashing stimulus to try and shore up the economy. But these new tariffs that China is imposing on American goods, 125%, they will kick in on April 12th. In issuing them, the Commission on Tariffs also said that it wouldn't be, or rather it would be ignoring any further hikes from the Trump administration, because it said that it was becoming a joke at this point. Those sentiments were echoed also by the Commerce Ministry, saying that the excessive tariffs were becoming economically meaningless and that it was really just becoming a numbers game between Washington and Beijing. But some analysts have also pointed out that at this point, what we might see is more non-tariff related punishments. So we'll just have to wait and see how Washington plays its cards next.
President Xi is also calling for a coordinated effort with the EU to push back at what it calls the US's bullying. But how likely will that happen?
Well, look, as a matter of fact, President Xi spoke for the first time about this tariff fight today. All along, even as President Trump has goaded China and as both sides have traded insults at one another, he has kept silent up until now. In his talks with Spain's Prime Minister today, he said that China's development had come about as a result of hard work and self-sufficiency, and that China would never fear what he described as unjustified bullying by the US. So, you know, in terms of whether or not China can get the EU on board, well, today was an opportunity for that to happen. This meeting with Spain's Prime Minister was about forging closer economic cooperation. China sees Spain very much as an interlocutor for the EU. Meanwhile, the EU perhaps sees this as an opportunity to advance its interests as well. Primarily, what it wants to do is balance trade with China, and this perhaps is an opportunity for it to do so, given that Beijing is being isolated from the world's biggest consumer market. But, you know, another thing that Europe has to worry about is that, you know, if China can no longer sell its goods to the US, that is potentially going to mean there is going to be a huge oversupply of cheap Chinese goods that are going to flood markets, particularly the EU. So there is a lot of incentive for both sides to cooperate with one another to an extent. But certainly there are going to be challenging areas for both sides as well.
Patrick, the Chinese leader is also set to visit Southeast Asian nations next week. What does he aim to achieve with this visit?
Yeah, well, this is all part of China's efforts to try and coordinate with other countries to come up with a unified response. What he really wants to do is to compel Washington to back down. This visit, as you say, is going to be a three-nation visit. President Xi will be stopping off in Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. And remember, ASEAN nations have been heavily hit by these Trump tariffs. They have received this reprieve, but there's still lots of uncertainty ahead. These are also countries that have benefited enormously by the actions that have been taken against China. Remember, China has been rerouting supply chains and selling a lot of its goods, exporting via these countries to the US. But that has also meant that they have found themselves in the crosshairs of Washington. So what Beijing really wants is to garner their support and to come up with a unified response to try and push back against Trump. At the same time, though, remember, these countries have also said that they are not going to retaliate against the Trump administration, and they're all separately trying to negotiate with the Trump administration. And those are discussions that China isn't part of.
And what's the view among people in China about the heightened tensions and the prospect of a trade war with the US?
Well, look, a lot of people that we've heard from support the government's efforts to push back. They see that there is really very little reason to negotiate with the Trump administration, even if there is any possibility of engagement. There is so much animosity at this point. It's difficult to see the two sides sitting down together and trying to talk this through. But, you know, people also are frustrated and angry with the situation. They have also been prepared for it somewhat, and a lot of businesses have been diversifying or expanding business elsewhere. But, you know, I think a lot of people are also feeling quite confident, whereas some people may be feeling that this was all part of President Trump's grand strategy to hold off for 90 days. There are a lot of people in China that also feel that this is an instance, this was really President Trump climbing down, and that, you know, everything that they've done so far has been justified, and this is what's resulted in Trump pulling back the way that he has.
Patrick Fock in Singapore, always great to have your insights. Thank you for joining me. We can now go to London to speak to economist and founder and CEO of Meyer Resources, Cornelia Meyer. Cornelia, thank you so much for joining me. Great to have you on the show. Global markets are in a flux as Trump says the US doing really well on tariff policy. How deep is the sell-off in markets, and what are the ramifications long term?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Leigh-Ann. Well, the sell-off in the market is actually quite big, but I think what's even worse than the sell-off is this, tariffs, then reprieve, and then you don't know what's happening. So investors really don't know where they're going. So you see markets in gigantic gyrations, whipsaws, and we used to be used to whipsaws in billions. We're now talking to whipsaws in the trillions. So this is very bad for investors. It is also very bad for companies because they don't know where to invest the next dollar to realign their supply chains.
Cornelia, actually, as we were talking earlier, Trump has paused tariffs on everyone but China for 90 days. And this has caused a major backlog for businesses around the world. What does a pause actually in supplies mean for global trade?
Well, it's not it's a temporary reprieve, but you don't know where it's going, and it's very bad. Let's say you're an exporter in Germany, you don't know, when are you loading the ship to bring the goods to the States. You don't know when they will be hit with tariffs, whether they will be hit with tariffs. It's an impossible situation in terms of pricing. So it's huge instability for anybody who is involved in trade.
JP Morgan's boss has warned the US economy is facing considerable turbulence. Trump's senior advisor says the president wants 90 deals in 90 days. How realistic is this?
This is not terribly realistic. And I see what Trump is doing. He's trying a sort of divide and rule approach. He doesn't like the EU because the EU is big, has materiality. So he wants to negotiate country by country by country, which is obviously very time consuming. So people will be rushed to come to some sort of an agreement. So you may get some agreements, but this is really an uphill battle. And again, it's bad in terms of stability. It's bad in terms of how the US is viewed. It totally undermines the rules-based trading system that was created essentially after the Second World War by the United States and has served the United States well. So this is in terms of long-term standing for the US, not good news. You see how the bond market reacted. It's a huge sell-off in treasuries. You see also that the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the US, a very senior official has said he thinks inflation this year in the US will be 4% or above.
There's been a lot of speculation that Trump has been manipulating the markets. What is your analysis of this?
That's really very hard to say because, President Trump is so erratic that you don't know where is the attention, where is there no intention. What was a bit unfortunate, I think, for him is that he yesterday or early today in the Oval Office said, so-and-so made so-and-so many billions, so-and-so made so many billions. That might not have been helpful.
Investors are putting their money in gold, the Swiss franc and the Japanese yen, as they normally do in times of turbulence. But why are these such safe havens right now?
Well, you look at Japan, especially Japan is the first country that basically came out and Trump said we'll have a negotiation. Switzerland, and Japan is also the largest investor in the US, so they'll probably come to an agreement. Switzerland is also for such a tiny nation, a pretty big investor in the US, especially in the sort of high-tech sector and so on. So they will probably get there. So that helps. Gold is, when there's a fear of inflation, people always flee to gold. Also, gold is very liquid. You saw when the first tariffs, the first onslaught of the tariffs came, that there was quite a bit of selling of gold because it's liquid and people had to meet their margin calls and they didn't want to have all their stocks unwound. So they unwound some gold. So they're now going back into gold because, the next margin call may come.
Cornelia, a lot of people in America support Donald Trump on reducing the trade deficit that we see with other countries. Do you think that tariffs are ever going to achieve the aim that Trump has?
No, I don't think it's going to achieve it. And what I see is that, again, he's undermining the rules-based system. He's undermining the status of the dollar. So I think there will be some long-term damage for the US. And when you look at history, generally, the countries that put on the tariffs are, in the long run, the countries that suffer the most.
Cornelia, Meyer, absolutely brilliant to have you on the show and your insights. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so very much, Leigh-Ann.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. An Israeli airstrike has killed 10 members of the same family, including 7 children in Khan Yunis. In another deadly attack, the Israeli army targeted a group of civilians, killing 2 people in the northern city of Bitlaya. The Israeli military said it had struck approximately 40 targets across Gaza over the past day. More than 200 people died after a roof collapsed at the Jet Set nightclub in the Dominican Republic, according to the latest death toll. The director of the Emergency Operations Center, Juan Manuel Mendez, said 189 people have been rescued alive since the incident on Tuesday. Among the dead is singer Ruby Perez, 2 former Major League Baseball players, and a local politician. Former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has returned to his private home after his removal from office. Yoon was stripped of all power and privileges last week by the Constitutional Court over his December the 3rd martial law declaration. Despite leaving the presidency behind, Yoon still faces a criminal trial on insurrection charges over his martial law declaration. And northern China is on high alert as a powerful cold vortex from Mongolia is expected to bring typhoon-like winds over the weekend. Workers have been told to hurry home, classes have been suspended, and outdoor events have been cancelled. Meteorologists have warned wind speeds could exceed records dating back to 1951. Countries across Europe have pledged a record boost in funding to Kyiv by giving $24 million in military aid. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is in Russia to meet Vladimir Putin. We can now go live to Moscow to speak to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, thanks so much for joining me this evening. What do we know about the meeting between Witkoff and Putin today?
Well, we know that this meeting is already taking place in the Russian city of St. Petersburg, where the Russian president is working on Friday. We know that in this conversation, the likely topic is the settlement of the situation in Ukraine. That's according to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, who has said that this meeting gives a very important opportunity for the sides to bring to the table the concerns they have and for Russia to convey its messages to the United States, to President Donald Trump, so that he receives the signals from the Russian side. We also understand that they could be touching upon the possible summit between the two presidents that could be taking place. So there is plenty to discuss, and the Kremlin has also noted that there is no timing for this meeting. It is the 3rd time that Witkoff is in Russia. Last time he was in Moscow on the 13th of March, when again he brought some clarifications of the American position to the Russian president and returned to Washington with the signals from the Russian side. And earlier in February, he was in Moscow negotiating the release of American Mark Vogel, who was convicted in Russia. We also understand that early in the day, Witkoff has had a meeting with one of Russia's negotiators, Kirill Dmitriev, the head of Russia's direct investment fund, who in turn last week traveled to Washington again for the talks with the American officials. So definitely it is seen as yet another brick into the construction of the dialogue between Moscow and Washington and the revival of their bilateral relations.
The development of the Russian Navy was also discussed today. What part can the US play in this regard?
Well, indeed, the Russian president is working in St. Petersburg because of that meeting on the development of the Russian Navy. Now, in the meeting that President Putin held, he said very clearly that the strategic nuclear forces of Russia serve as a guarantee of Russian security. And therefore, President Vladimir Putin said that the share of modern technology in this area is 100%. So at this stage, we understand Moscow is willing to make sure that the technology area here is very high-based, and therefore it doesn't seem to be the case that Moscow can be cooperating with Washington, because the idea that the Russian president has brought to the table is that in the current circumstances, those are the forces that are absolutely necessary for the ensuring of Russia's national security and sovereignty, and therefore role of the United States here could be only as the party that is certainly making and encouraging Russia to develop this area even further. Again, that is because of the geopolitical environment that we are seeing at this stage. So undoubtedly, we've heard the Russian president saying that he's satisfied with the level of the development of this military fleet, but also saying that Russian ships have to be able to solve the whole range of tasks that they are facing, making sure and making it clear to both domestic and international audience that Russia is definitely betting on the development of its military might.
Dasha, Trump has posted on social media saying Russia needs to get a move on, threatening sanctions if he does not come to the negotiating table. Is there any indication that we could see President Putin in Moscow anytime soon?
Well, what we definitely can understand is that the sides are negotiating, and obviously the expectations were before the talks started that this Ukrainian conflict could be solved much faster. And we understand that this message that you have just quoted has been posted just hours ahead of the meeting between Putin and Witkoff in St. Petersburg. So the understanding is that this is definitely going to be part of the discussion between the Russian president and America's envoy, Steve Witkoff. However, no breakthrough are expected according to the Kremlin. But also, it does seem that Moscow will also be pushing the United States to press Ukraine to abide by what Moscow says Ukrainian violations of the moratorium on the strikes on the energy facilities, which was brokered by the United States on the 18th of March for the next 30 days. This time is about to be up. So definitely there are many issues that are going to be discussed, and there are many issues that are contested. So undoubtedly Moscow will be pushing forward its agenda to make sure its concerns are alleviated, and the US side will also be pressing forward with its ideas how they see this conflict being resolved. And it is quite unclear whether any side will be willing to make the concessions, but the very idea of the sides making sure this diplomacy is ongoing is already a good sign.
Dasha, apologies. I meant to say, would we see President Trump in Moscow anytime soon? But I think you managed to read between the lines there. Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you so much. Earlier, I spoke to Ukrainian MP Rudik to discuss the new pledge of military aid and her take on the US and Russia meeting in Moscow today. Thank you so much for joining me. Defense ministers from 50 countries have been holding Ukraine talks at the NATO headquarters. They've pledged $24 billion in new military support for Kyiv. How will this money be used on the ground in Ukraine?
Hello, Leigh, and thank you so much for having me. The main request that we have to all our allies is the air defense systems and the supply for them. This is the key priority for all of us, especially given the recent attacks on the civil infrastructure and on the residential buildings by Russia. We have seen attacks on Kyiv and the recent attack on the Rubio. So we have to have an ability to take down those missiles and drones. This is why, as we have said, it is our priority. However, there was also an announcement by our military commandment that Russia have started an offensive on two directions in the east of Ukraine. This is why for us it is critical to be able to fight back and defend ourselves against this aggression. And this is why we will use all the resources that we have to strengthen our army in that direction.
Kira, in light of what you just told me, is this enough money to help Ukraine fend off Russia and achieve peace?
Well, you are asking two questions in one. The first one regarding would it be enough? Well, Russia has planned to spend over $100 billion on its military this year. This is why, for us, though we are very grateful for all pieces of the support that we are receiving, we cannot say that something is enough to fight back, especially given that right now we are concentrated again on the defenses. Second point is about peace, and I'm sure that peace cannot be delivered when Russia is attacking us at the battlefield in our peaceful cities. And there were very high hopes with the negotiations that was led by new President Trump's administration. However, this is not something that we have seen again on the ground, that these negotiations had some results. We know that right now the special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is meeting with Putin, trying to bring him back to the negotiation table. But I want to make it very clear that it was much easier for President Trump to talk to Ukraine and to pressure us into having some peace negotiations. As of right now, we haven't seen any sign of goodwill from Russia. And as of right now, we haven't seen any ability to trust Russia's words, and they have made President Trump look very bad, especially given that after the negotiation in Riyadh, the U.S. representatives and Russian representatives gave almost opposite statements about what they have agreed on, and that after those ceasefire negotiations, Russia has constantly been attacking us at the battlefield and on the civil infrastructure.
So, Kira, Donald Trump has actually just sent a message out on social media, and he's basically saying Russia needs to get moving. You mentioned Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin are meeting today. Does this meeting signal Trump's growing frustration with Vladimir Putin? As you said, it seemed a lot easier to pressure Ukraine into coming to the table.
President Trump has said constantly that he believes that you can trust Putin and that Putin respects him. Well, right now it's time to put these statements to question and see, would it really work? Again, President Trump has constantly been saying that he has some cards to play with Russia, and I think right now would be a time to show them. What kind of pressure can the United States put on Russia, either sanctions or additional tariffs? Because let me remind you that Russia was not included in the list of countries with tariffs. So basically, they are even they're paying right now less than EU and less than Canada, less than Britain. They had basically everything been taken very easy on them. So we need to see when President Trump will move from trying to agree with Russia to actual pressure points. It took maybe a couple of days since the Oval Office spat, when the United States have stopped military supply and intelligence supply to Ukraine to pressure us for the negotiations. So I think enough time passed between the latest round of negotiations with Russia that right now they will move from threats to actual sanctions or whatever that would be.
Kira, I just want to change gears slightly and ask you about Prince Harry's secret trip to Ukraine. That's been in the spotlight today. What do you make of his visit to the country?
You know, we appreciate everyone's support, especially in such a delicate topic as veterans and the veterans who have lost their limbs and who are recovering. And we appreciate all pieces of the support that we can get from all over the world. And of course, it means a lot for our veterans to get the attention of a member of royal family and to get his goodwill and words of support and pretty much like the emotional attention that the people need. It has been overall very important for all of us to know that we are not alone in this fight and in everything that we are facing after the fight. So, of course, we are grateful, and we have received many good words from all over the country, saying that it's important to know that veterans are not forgotten as well. And while Ukraine is fighting for our survival, We have thousands of people who have been wounded during this war, and aside of some physical support and medical support that we are trying to get them, they also need lots of attention and emotional support, knowing that they are not forgotten and knowing that there will be a life after the treatments that they will go through.
Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik, thank you so much for joining me. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to bring back the remaining Gaza hostages during the Jewish Passover holiday. His comments follow President Trump's suggested progress in the hostage release talks, telling his cabinet, "We are getting close to getting them back." President Trump will face a defamation case brought by the members of the so-called Central Park Five, the 5 Black and Hispanic men who were wrongly convicted and imprisoned in 1989, have enough evidence that the now US president defamed them in comments during the 2024 presidential campaign. A new high-speed rail service will be built in Italy, connecting the underdeveloped south of the country. Using European funds, it's hoped the new network will help the population and the economy. The 145-kilometre route will connect cities on the Mediterranean coast to the shores of the Adriatic in just 2 hours. Star of Euphoria and Grey's Anatomy, Eric Dane, has been diagnosed with ALS, the most common form of motor neuron disease. The 52-year-old actor told People magazine he was grateful to have his family by his side as he navigated the next chapter. Dane says he plans to continue working and return to the set of Euphoria next week. US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff may be in Russia today, but tomorrow he will travel to Oman for breakthrough talks with Iran. Witkoff will meet Iran's foreign minister to discuss Tehran's nuclear program. Earlier this week, President Trump said the planned summit was the start of a process with Iran. He added that the talks would be direct. Meanwhile, Iran has said it will be done through a mediator. I'm now joined by Al Arabiya Iran expert, Yaghoub Fazeli. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you on the show. The US says direct talks. Iran says indirect. Either way, they both agreed to talk. What will Tehran be looking to get out of these meetings on Sunday?
I think Iran will try its best to avoid any discussions on non-nuclear related issues, such as the ballistic missile program or support for various armed militias in the Middle East, like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. I think they will try to keep the meeting nuclear focused. And just yesterday, Axios had a report that said the Iranians are thinking of proposing an interim agreement just in the meantime, because they don't think that Trump's 2-month deadline is sufficient. It's not enough time to reach a proper deal. So they're saying, let's reach an interim deal just in the meantime. Under a deal like that, Iran would suspend some of its uranium enrichment activities and allow more access to UN inspectors to its nuclear facilities. None of those are deal breakers for Tehran, so they'd be okay with that. And in return, they would ask for a suspension or perhaps an easing of sanctions and Trump's ongoing maximum pressure campaign. Now, whether that would be enough or acceptable to Trump, we'll have to wait and see.
Ahead of these talks that are happening on Saturday, Trump reportedly called for the full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. Iran has said this is a red line, but is there a world where they would give up their nuclear program to avoid a US military attack?
Well, Trump himself, the Trump administration hasn't been very clear about its intentions, because we've heard Steve Witkoff, who will lead the talks on Saturday, He said that the US wants a verification program, basically to verify, to make sure that Iran's nuclear material is not used for non-civilian purposes, for weaponization. But on the other hand, we've also heard from Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, who said a very different thing, that the US wants to see Iran's nuclear program fully dismantled. They want to see Iran, they want Iran to give up its nuclear program in its entirety. And these are two very different things. What Witkoff called for, if that is indeed what Washington wants, that's something Iran can live with. It's not really a red line. They've done it before with Obama. But the second thing, which is what Waltz is calling for, which is to fully dismantle the nuclear program, that is a red line. But I wouldn't say it's a permanent red line. The Iranian regime is very flexible when it comes to survival, when it feels like it's endangered. So if they feel like that either they fully give up the nuclear program or risk U.S. attacks, I think they would. There's a high likelihood they would give it up. The mere fact that they've even agreed to sit down with the Trump administration itself is an example of that flexibility. It's known in Iran as heroic flexibility. And that is because the Iranian regime prioritizes self-preservation above all else. And Tehran believes that the greatest threat to its stability, to the regime's grip on power, is a U.S. military attack. It doesn't fear anything else or anyone else more than that. So I think in the end, if they're forced with only two options, give up the nuclear program or be attacked, I think we could see them give it up. And let's not forget as well, in 2019, the supreme leader of Iran banned talks with Trump, and that time they stuck by it. There were no negotiations between Trump and Iran, but this time we're saying that they've agreed to speak. Now, that could be because the situation is very different, 2015 versus 2019, because Iran is in a much worse position. Bashar al-Assad in Syria is gone. Hezbollah in Lebanon is severely weakened. So that could be another reason why they've once again decided to be flexible, show flexibility.
But there's also been severe economic and social repressions in Iran. They've been heavily sanctioned. Would people there be willing to fight for Iran if a US attack did take place?
I think this issue is another reason why Iran has agreed to speak with Trump and the Trump administration. The situation, the economic conditions in Iran are very dire. And the economy aside, the regime is not very popular at home due to social restrictions and political repression. We've seen wave after wave of anti-regime protests in recent years. We had the Mahsa Amini protests not long ago, which were very significant. So the regime, I don't think they can guarantee that in the event of war, the population would rally behind them. And that's another reason why I think they've decided to speak to the Trump administration, because Trump is saying, he's not saying whether he wants a verification program or whether he wants it fully dismantled. We don't know exactly what he's after, but he's saying Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, and if we can't reach an agreement via diplomacy, then I will attack. And it seems like Iran believes him. Otherwise, I don't think they would have sat down to speak. In 2019, they didn't. So I think whilst Iran, the regime thinks it can handle domestic unrest, but I don't think it believes it can handle domestic unrest coupled with a foreign attack, especially by the US. I think it fears that the population would try to take advantage of a foreign attack to stage an uprising, which would, of course, endanger the very existence of the regime.
Al Arabiya Iran expert Yaghoub Fazeli, thank you so much for bringing us some of the details ahead of those talks between the US and Iran on Saturday in Oman. Let's take a look at the top business news now. The British economy has returned to growth in February with its fastest expansion in 11 months, beating economists' expectations. According to the Office for National Statistics, gross domestic product grew at a monthly pace of 0.5%, but Trump tariffs threaten future growth. Elsewhere, the jobs market weakened again in March, with the number of people looking for work rising by the most in more than 4 years. Prada has struck a $1.4 billion deal to buy smaller rival Versace from Capri Holdings. This move will unite two of the biggest names in Italian fashion and offers the prospect of enhanced revenues. Prada is seeking to expand, having defied a slowdown in luxury demand, while Versace has been operating at a loss in its recent quarters. Turning to sports news now. Liverpool fans are celebrating after Mohamed Salah confirmed he is staying at the club after months of speculation. The Premier League leaders said this morning that he has signed a 2-year contract extension at Anfield. Salah is Liverpool's third highest goalscorer of all time. And the Masters leader Justin Rose pars his opening hole as the second round gets underway at Augusta. The veteran Englishman had a dream start on Thursday, keeping his cool to maintain his 3-shot lead over defending champion Scottie Scheffler and 2 other players. Rory McIlroy is kicking off his second round and has work to do to get his career Grand Slam bid back on track. A reminder of our top stories. Trump's senior trade advisor says the president wants 90 deals in 90 days following his pause on tariffs. China has announced it's raising additional levies on U.S. goods to 125%. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff is in Russia holding talks with Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, countries across Europe pledged $24 million in military aid to Ukraine. That's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next, followed by our brand new show, The Real Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Lots for you to watch there. Goodbye and thank you.